Scream, the fan novelization by Landon Turner. Chapter 6. Deja Vu. Sydney screamed at the top of her lungs. It seemed to come out of nowhere, a final release of all the cortisol and adrenaline that had hijacked her body just a few minutes earlier. She reeled backwards in horror at the sight of the skull-faced mask that had been lurching at her moments before, throwing her hands to her face. Then the mask lowered. Her breath hitched. It was Dewey. He jerked back at her scream, letting out a startled yelp of his own as he dropped the rubber mask to his side. For a split second, they just stared at each other. Sydney froze, hand clamped over her mouth, lungs struggling to remember how to work. Embarrassment flickered through her, brief and distant. It was nothing compared to the violent pounding of her heart, the dizzying brain fog, and the sense that the world was still tilting beneath her feet. Everything felt chaotic, off balance. Her body refused to settle, trapped somewhere between fight and flight. Dewey held up his hands defensively. "I found this in the yard," he exclaimed, holding up the rubber mask in his hand. Sydney looked at the mask, flabbergasted. She glanced back towards the staircase, watching Billy come flying down, screaming her name frantically. Her voice broke as she turned back to Dewey, tears spilling over. He attacked me, Dewey. Billy tried to kill me." The words shattered whatever composure she had left. She collapsed into Dewey's chest, sobbing, gripping onto him like he was the only solid thing in the room. "Sydney, what?" Billy started to say, but all of a sudden Dewey withdrew a silver pistol and leveled the barrel at Billy's head. "Stop right there, Loomis. You're not going anywhere." The side of Billy's face smashed against the hot metal hood of the police car parked in Sydney's driveway. The impact rang out in the night as two broad-shouldered officers wrenched his arms behind his back and snapped the cuffs tight around his wrist. "Do you understand the right to remain silent?" the younger deputy barked, his voice sharp as a rifle crack. "Do you understand your right to an attorney during questioning?" Billy squirmed helplessly in their grasp. "I didn't do anything!" he shouted. "Ask Sydney, she'll tell you!" The two officers ignored his pleas and heaved him to his feet, leading him towards another police car parked on the curb. Sheriff Burke stood on the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, a cigarette dangling from his mouth. Billy lurched toward him in desperation. Sheriff, call these guys off. I didn't do it!" The deputies yanked him back hard enough to make him stumble. Burke pulled the cigarette from his lips, flicked it to the pavement in front of Billy, and crushed it beneath his boot. "Sydney! Sydney!" Billy bellowed desperately as he was shoved into the back of the police car parked at the curb. "Who was that?" Burke asked. Dewey stood a few feet away, eyes fixed across the road. He didn't look at the sheriff. Billy Loomis," he said quietly. "Sid's boyfriend." Burke followed Dewey's line of sight. On the other side of the road, Sydney sat in the open back of an ambulance, wrapped in a gray wool blanket. The flashing lights painted her face in alternating washes of red and blue. She stared upward, unblinking, at the black stretch of sky. "How's she doing?" Burke asked. Dewey swallowed. "She's tougher than she looks." "She'd have to be after all the shit she's been through," Burke said, shaking his head. Sydney pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She refused to look at the cruiser, refused to look at Billy sitting inside it like a caged animal. But she felt him there. Her body trembled with too many emotions to name. Guilt clawing at her ribs, uncertainty twisting in her stomach, fear still crawling beneath her skin. They collided inside of her, loud and relentless. She could still see those eyes, wild, hateful, twisted with rage, staring down at her through the black holes of that mask. Her gaze drifted to Dewey. He was still holding it, the rubber face dangling from his fingers, slack and lifeless now. She wanted to go to him, to say something, to do something, but she felt hollowed out. It has to be up to them, she thought. Just catch him. No, that wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was to be anywhere but here, away from this house, away from this town that no longer felt like home. Take me away from all of it, and while you're at it, bring my mother back. Her thoughts splintered, circling back inevitably to Billy. Could he have actually done it, she thought? Was he actually the one in that costume on top of her, waving that knife at her like a madman? She kept combing back through the events of her attack, but it was all a blur. It happened so fast. She wanted details, something concrete, a slip in his voice, a movement she recognized, a gesture that would prove it was Billy, or prove it wasn't. A tremor passed through her. She could still feel the icy drag of the blade across her throat, the deliberate pressure, not cutting, just promising. She could still feel the weight of him, the strength in his hands, pinning her to the floor, and his voice, the voice on the phone.
If you hang up on me, you'll die just like your mother.
The words looped endlessly in her mind. She played those words over and over again in there, trying to think, trying to place that distinctive voice with a face. But the voice was so distorted, so unusual. It didn't sound like anyone she knew. It didn't sound like Billy or Cotton. There was no way it was Cotton. He was on death row for murdering her mother. She would have heard if he'd escaped. The whole town would have known. Unless no one was paying attention. Unless Casey and Steve's murders had swallowed every headline, or worse. What if Cotton hadn't escaped? What if he'd hired someone? Her stomach tightened. The thought felt paranoid, desperate, like her brain was reaching for anything that made more sense than the boy she loved standing outside her bedroom window minutes after the killer vanished. Minutes. And he'd been outside her window the night Casey and Steve were murdered, too. That wasn't paranoia. That was a fact. Was it a coincidence? She didn't know which possibility terrified her more. Billy trying to kill her, or Billy being innocent. And the real attacker could still be out there, watching, waiting, ready to finish what he started. She stared out into the woods across the street. One thought haunted her. If Billy wasn't responsible for this terrifying encounter, then the one who was responsible was gone like the ghost in the night. This couldn't be happening. The police cars, the flashing lights, the inevitable interview, all of the questions that she would be asked. It was all coming back to her. She somehow felt like her mother had been murdered all over again. The police surrounding her house, her sitting in the back of an ambulance wrapped in a blanket. It was just like that night. She thought it couldn't get worse after her mother being brutally murdered, but it was. It was getting so much worse. Sydney shut her eyes, trying to process what had happened. Part of her wanted to think back, to try to determine who was speaking on the other end of the phone. Hearing that raspy voice play over and over in her mind, she wanted to think back and remember every detail about her attacker, his weight, height, if it was a man, if it was a woman. Another part of her wanted to forget about the whole ordeal altogether. Either way, this wasn't just a bad dream, this was happening. Just an hour earlier, someone tried to kill her, and she was alive. She had been luckier than Casey or Steve. She had survived. She hoped she would have the strength to escape her attacker again. That is, if he or she was still out there. Sydney's thoughts were broken by a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at Sheriff Burke and Dewey hovering over her with concerned faces. "Well, we're seeing a lot of you today," Burke said. Sydney smiled weakly. "Are you going to be able to come down to the station and answer a few questions?" She nodded silently. Just then a red Volkswagen came barreling around the corner, screeching to a stop in front of Sydney's house. Tatum sprang from the driver's seat, slamming the door closed, terrified by the sight of police cars and ambulances surrounding her best friend's house. She began to look around frantically. "Sydney? Oh my God, Sydney!" Tatum yelled hysterically. She finally saw Sydney in the back of the ambulance and sprinted over towards her, her perfectly straight blonde hair bouncing on her shoulders. "Sydney, oh my God, Sydney, are you all right? I am so sorry I was late. She wrapped her arms around Sydney and hugged her tightly. Dewey gingerly intervened, pulling Tatum off of her. Tatum, you can't be here. It's an official crime scene, Dewey scolded in a fatherly tone. Dewey, it's okay, Sydney said. Tatum spun around to face her older half-brother, giving him a dirty look. Her dad's out of town and she's staying with us tonight, Tatum snapped. Does Mom know? Yes, doofus. Tatum coined that nickname for Dewey in 9th grade, and it was her go-to insult whenever Dewey got on her nerves, and Dewey hated it. Dewey let out a frustrated sigh, took off his hat, and ran his hands through his dark hair nervously. Tatum bent back down to Sydney, her eyes wide with worry. Sid, are you okay? What happened? I'm okay. We'll talk tonight, Sydney said. Sheriff Burke turned to one of his deputies standing idly on the sidewalk. Hey you, get this kid into one of the cars and get her back to the station, Sheriff Burke ordered. The young blonde deputy on the sidewalk hurried over to the ambulance, helped Sydney to her feet, and walked her over to one of the many police cars scattered around the residence. Sheriff Burke let out a deep sigh, rubbing his brow anxiously. He glanced down at the rubber mask still clutched in Dewey's hand. Dewey held it up in front of him. Creepy, huh? Dewey said, giving the mask to Burke, who studied it and shook his head, taking a drag of another cigarette he had lit. All of a sudden, a tan-colored news van came careening down the long, desolate country road and pulled to an abrupt halt, almost bowling over another reporter and her cameraman. Gail Weathers banged open the passenger side door, a shiny microphone grasped in her hand, her hair and makeup still perfectly done, her tight, verdant skirt perfectly accentuating her long, slender legs. Her eyes widened with ecstasy. She knew this house. She had a feeling when she heard the street name over the police radio. It was Sidney Prescott's house, and there were police crawling all over it. She smiled deviously. Well, I'll be damned, she said, her heart pounding with excitement. Behind her, Gail's burly cameraman, Kenny, clambered out of the driver's seat, his massive video camera resting on his shoulder. Gail snapped at Kenny with her hand, not bothering to look at him. Jesus, the camera, hurry! My name isn't Jesus, Kenny muttered under his breath. Gail walked towards the house, her bright red high heels digging into the asphalt, moving purposefully. A squad car sped past Gail, and she thought she caught a glimpse of Sidney in the back seat. She ran over to a deputy and jammed her microphone in his face. Was Sidney in there? What can you tell me about this scene? I heard something about a costume. What about a costume? The deputy held up his hand and shoved the microphone away. Can you tell me anything, goddammit? She shrieked. Still no response from the stone-faced deputy. Shit! Gail muttered under her breath and turned to face the road. Tatum was walking hurriedly to her car. Gail sprinted towards her and ran alongside. Tatum gave her a death glare. Was that Sidney Prescott in that car? Gail asked, holding the microphone to her face. Tatum swatted the mic away. I'm not talking to you, she snapped coldly. What happened to her? Gail hammered her again. None of your damn business. Can you tell me anything? Said Gail. Tatum spun around and got as close as she could to Gail's face. Yeah, you're a real pain in the ass. Leave Sid alone. And with that, she flung open the door to her red Volkswagen, climbed inside, and sped off, following the squad car. Gail was frozen with anger. She took a deep breath and spun around to see Kenny shambling lazily over to where she was, unable to keep up and breathing heavily. Look, Kenny, Gail said, clasping her hands. Yeah? I know you're about 50 pounds overweight, but when I say hurry, please interpret that as move your fat tub of lard ass now, Gail screamed, snatched the Snickers bar out of his right hand, tossed it into the bushes, and stormed back towards the news van. Why me? Sydney was transfixed on the blank gray walls of the interrogation room. The paint was dull, institutional, lifeless. It felt like the room was trying to swallow her whole. He could have broken into any house. He could have chosen any girl, so why her? She tried to anchor herself in logic. After all, her house set on the outskirts of town. Fewer neighbors, longer police response time, just like Casey's. That made sense. It had to be that. An isolated attack, a random target. But the words from the phone call crawled back into her mind, slow and deliberate. You'll die just like your mother. Her stomach twisted. That was not random. There was nothing random about that. It had been almost exactly 1 year since her mother's murder. A cold realization settled over her. If she hadn't gone out that night a year ago, if she had stayed home, she might have ended up just like her mother. Violated, slaughtered, another crime scene soaked into the carpet of her bedroom. The thought made her throat tighten. The killer was back to finish what he started. But that didn't make sense. Cotton was in prison. He had to be, on death row, locked away behind steel and concrete. Right? Then who the hell was under that mask? What did he want? My death? Why? Why me? Her thoughts fractured, turning sharp and chaotic. Fucking why? Sydney dropped her head into her hands and pressed her fingers against her temples, as if she could physically hold her mind together. Everything she had believed for the past year, every headline, every courtroom testimony, every whispered conversation suddenly felt unstable. For the first time since her mother's trial, doubt crept in. What if Cotton was not the one who killed her mother? What if they were all wrong, and if they were wrong, then whoever murdered her mother was still out there? The door to the room opened, and Dewey came into the room with Sheriff Burke. They both sat down, and Dewey pressed play on the tape recorder, sitting at the center of the table. "Hi, Sydney. You doing okay?" Sheriff Burke said. Sydney nodded weakly. "Dumb question, eh?" "Sydney, we can't get a hold of your father. Are you sure it was the Hilton he was staying at?" Dewey asked. Sydney nodded. "At the airport?" "He's not registered there," Burke said. "Could he have stayed somewhere else?" Sydney scoffed. Now her dad was missing? What was next? I don't know. I guess, Sydney said, tears welling up in her eyes. She felt herself completely shutting down inside, like wet cement or molasses had been injected into her arteries. "Don't worry, Sid. We'll find him," Dewey said, touching her hand sympathetically. Sydney couldn't hold it in anymore. It has to be Cotton," she blurted out. Dewey shook his head. "Sydney, Cotton's in jail." It was Cotton on the phone. I know it. He told me he was the same guy who killed my mother." "We know, Sydney, but there's no way. We called San Quentin and Cotton is there," Burke replied. Sydney leaned back in the chair, shaking her head, holding back tears. "Then I don't know who it could be." Sydney's voice trailed off, and she remembered Billy. "Except for Billy, but—" she started to say. "Sydney, we think it's strange how Billy happened to show up right after you were attacked," Burke said. I know, Sydney said. She had to tell them. She had to tell them what she knew. Everything about how Billy was at her window the night of Casey and Steve's murder. She didn't even hear herself say it. Her mind totally blanked, so she didn't have to hear herself accuse Billy as her attacker and the cold-blooded killer of two people. Dewey and Sheriff Burke gave each other a look and whispered to each other. Sydney tuned them out and turned to look through the window into the hallway, where Billy was being led down the hallway into an interrogation room by two deputies. Before he disappeared, he craned his neck to make eye contact with her, and Sydney felt him staring into her soul. She stared at him for what seemed like an eternity, trying to see her boyfriend, trying to see the boy that she loved, and all she saw was pure evil. Hank Loomis looked like he'd had the life sucked out of him, even more so than he usually did ever since his wife had left him. He sat stiffly beside his son, hands locked together in his lap, knuckles pale. Every few seconds he shifted in the hard chair, leather creaking beneath him. Across the metal table, Sheriff Burke sipped from a chipped ceramic mug, studying Billy over the rim. "Why don't you tell me what you're doing with the cellular phone, son?" Burke asked evenly, though the accusation beneath it was unmistakable. Billy kept his eyes on the floor for a moment before shrugging. "Everybody's got one, Sheriff," he said. "I didn't make those calls, I swear." "Why don't you check the phone records, for Christ's sake?" Hank suddenly blurted out. "Call Vital Phone Comp. They've got a record of every number dialed." Burke didn't look at him. "Thanks, Hank, we're on top of it." The sarcasm landed flat in the sterile room. Burke set the mug down and fixed his attention back on Billy. "What were you doing at Sidney Prescott's house tonight?" Billy's jaw tightened. "I wanted to see her, that's all," he said flatly. "And last night?" Burke pressed. "Sidney says you crawled through her window last night, too." "I was watching TV. I got bored and thought I'd go for a ride." "Did you happen to ride by Casey Becker's house?" Burke asked. Billy's eyes snapped up, sharp and furious. "No," he said, heat rising in his voice. "No, it didn't, Sheriff. I didn't kill anybody." Burke leaned back slightly, studying him, the tremor in his hands, the moisture gathering along his lower lashes, the way anger and fear tangled together behind his eyes. After a long moment, Burke stood. "We're going to have to hold you until those phone records come in," he said, voice flat and procedural. "Standard practice." Billy shook his head, disbelief cracking through the bravado. "This is crazy," he muttered, blinking hard. Hank placed a hand on his son's shoulder, protective, almost desperate, and looked up at Burke with something close to pleading. Burke gave him a small shrug and a silent, "I'm just doing my job" look. Then he turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him just as Dewey rounded the corner of the hallway outside. Dewey held up a purchased ghost mask wrapped in store packaging. Father Death was emblazoned in bold letters across the front of the wrapper. "This mask is sold at every 5 and dime in the state. There's no way we can track the purchase," Dewey sighed. Sheriff Burke sighed too, rubbing the wrinkles on his forehead. "What about the cellular phone bill?" asked Burke. We are pulling Loomis's account, but we won't know anything until morning. And still no word on Sidney's father. It's like he's vanished," Dewey said. Behind them, the metallic scrape of a chair echoed from the interrogation room. 2 deputies escorted Billy into the hallway, his hands cuffed behind his back. He spotted Sidney immediately. She sat at one of the desks beside Tatum, shoulders hunched, fingers laced tightly together in her lap. "Come on, Sid," Billy pleaded, twisting against the deputies. "You know me, Sidney." Heads turned down the corridor. "Sidney!" he shouted again, voice cracking. She raised a trembling hand to the side of her face, shielding herself from the sight of him. She didn't look up. The deputies steered Billy through a set of double doors. They swung shut with a hollow thud, swallowing him from view. The hallway fell quiet again. Dewey shook his head, watching the doors for a long moment before turning back to Burke. "You think he did it?" Burke spread his hands in a tired half shrug. 20 years ago, he said, "I'd have told you not a chance." He glanced down the hallway where Billy had disappeared. "But with these kids today..." He let the thought trail off. "Damned if I know." Dewey looked back towards Sidney to see Tatum moving purposefully towards them, clearly displeased. "Dewey, can we go?" said Tatum impatiently. Dewey held up his hands in protest. "Not yet. Give us a minute." "God damn it, Dewey!" Tatum exclaimed in exasperation. Dewey turned to her, his face growing red. "What did Mom tell you? When I wear this badge, you treat me like a man of the law," he said, his voice cracking like a 12-year-old boy's. Tatum rolled her eyes. "Sorry, Deputy Dewey boy, but Sydney is ready to go, and so am I." Tatum spun around on her heels and walked back over to Sydney. Dewey clenched his fist at her. Burke stifled a laugh and patted Dewey on the back. "Take her out the back and avoid the media circus out front," said Burke. Tatum put her arm around Sydney and ushered her towards the back hallway, with Dewey in pursuit. The Woodsboro Police Station was a modest 2-story brick building sitting squarely in the town center. It was the kind of structure that blended easily with the bakery, the hardware store, and the insurance office beside it. Tonight it looked like the center of the universe. News vans clogged the street, satellite dishes pointed at the sky, reporters and cameramen swarmed the steps, their voices rising in chaotic burst over the glare of floodlights. The sliding door of one van flew open. Gail Weathers stepped down onto the gravel, her bright red heels sinking slightly as she straightened. She checked her reflection in the van's side mirror, flashed herself a camera-ready smile, and quickly wiped a streak of lipstick from her teeth. Behind her, Kenny hauled himself out of the driver's seat, an Oreo clenched between his teeth and a camera already balanced on his shoulder. Gail snapped her fingers impatiently. "Let's go, Kenny!" She was already moving, cutting through cables and reporters, climbing the marble steps 2 at a time. "Gail!" Kenny said, catching up to her. "They're not letting anyone in." She snapped her head around. "I'm not just anyone." An officer tried to block her path. She slipped past him with practiced ease, slicing through the crowd like a blade, microphone in hand. A uniformed guard stepped directly in front of her, arms spread wide like a barricade. "Hey, watch it!" Gail snapped. "Do you know who you're dealing with here?" "No one is allowed inside the station, ma'am," he replied, face carved from stone. "Fuck!" Gail hissed under her breath. "I tried to tell you," Kenny muttered behind her. She silenced him with a sharp flick of her fingers and pivoted, shoving sideways through the press of bodies, elbowing ribs and shoulders without apology. Then she saw it. Around the side of the building, away from the circus of cameras, a side door opened. Sydney emerged with Dewey and Tatum, heading toward Dewey's county-issued station wagon parked along the curb. Gail's eyes lit up. She bolted down the sidewalk, heels striking fast and furious against the pavement, microphone thrust forward like a weapon. "Sydney Prescott!" she shouted. Sydney turned. The moment she recognized who was charging toward her, the color drained from her face. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Gail closed the distance and shoved the microphone inches from Sydney's mouth, smile blazing. "Sydney." "Hi. Some night, huh?" she said brightly. "Mind answering a few questions?" Tatum moved fast, sidestepping Gail and planting herself squarely between the mic and Sydney. "She's not answering any of your questions," Tatum declared. Sydney gently touched her arm and eased her aside. "No, it's okay, Tatum. She's just doing her job, right, Gail?" Sydney said, putting on the fakest smile she could muster. "Let's see what this bitch has to say," Sydney thought. "Yes, that's right," Gail smiled, a little surprised and pleased by Sydney's cooperation. Sydney folded her arms loosely across her chest. "How's the book?" she asked, feigning polite interest. Gail's smile widened. "It'll be out later this year." "Oh?" Sydney tilted her head. "I'll look for it." Her tone was syrup sweet, almost sincere. Almost. Gail heard the edge underneath and decided to press anyways. "I'll send you a copy." Something shifted in Sydney's face. The smile vanished. What happened next moved faster than thought. Sydney's arm drew back and swung forward in one clean, furious arc. Her fist connected hard with the side of Gail's face, a sharp crack that silenced the crowd. Gail staggered backwards, stunned, crashing into Kenny's chest as she scrambled to keep both her and the camera from toppling over. The few reporters that had swarmed in behind Gale all gasped in shock, snapping pictures rapidly of what had just happened and mumbling excitedly. Kenny helped Gale to her feet as she rubbed the side of her face in pain and stared at Sydney in disbelief. Sydney flashed Gale an icy yet satisfied death glare. Tatum smirked. "Nice shot," she said. Dewey, after a moment of being frozen with disbelief, grabbed Sydney by the arm and yanked her towards the station wagon. The Riley house was a large two-story ranch-style home at the end of yet another quiet suburban street. It felt safe to Sydney, at least in the sense that there were actually neighbors who would be able to hear screams and help out if any of them needed it. But even with that comfort, Sydney was still on edge the rest of the night. Tatum's bedroom was surprisingly effeminate and tweenish for a girl like herself. There were 2 twin beds covered in pink, frilly blankets and stuffed animals, walls covered in calendars, Tom Cruise and Leonardo DiCaprio posters, and bulletin boards stapled with Polaroids. Sid was lying on the bed on the left, in a pink nightshirt, staring blankly at the ceiling while Tatum bounced softly on the bed on the right, clutching a stuffed bunny. "God, I loved it. I'll send you a copy," Tatum said, mocking Gale. She hit the stuffed bunny playfully. "Bam! Bitch went down. I'll send you a copy. Bam! Sid! Super bitch! You are so cool." Sydney forced a smile. She was at least grateful to have a supportive friend. She glanced at her right fist, which was red and raw from where she had hit Gale. The door to the room opened and Dewey came in, clutching an ice pack. "Thought you might need something for that right hook," he said, tossing her the ice pack. Sydney caught it and placed it on her hand. "Thanks." "I'll be right next door," Dewey said. "If you need anything, just yell." Tatum rolled her eyes and shooed him with her hand. Yeah. Dewey moved out the door, closing it behind him. Sydney sighed and rolled over onto her side. After a few moments of awkward silence, Tatum spoke up. "Do you really think that Billy did it?" Sydney hesitated. "He was there, Tatum." "Well, I knew he was too perfect," Tatum said, smiling. "He was destined to have a flaw." Sydney forced another smile, trying to feel a sense of humor, but it felt like nothing could make her genuinely laugh after tonight. She kept seeing Billy's face and trying to put it under that mask, trying to hear Billy's voice with that distorted voice on the phone, to no avail. She kept hearing what the man had said on the phone, the demented and horrible things. "Do you want to die? Your mother sure didn't." And in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but feel he was still out there, watching, waiting for the right time. Maybe he never planned to kill her tonight after all. What if that was just him practicing for the real thing, just to scare her? If not Cotton and not Billy, then who? Who was... That was the question that was haunting her. What was worse? Her own boyfriend being accused of attempted murder and being put in jail, or her attacker still on the loose? Her thoughts were broken by the door to the room opening, and Tatum and Dewey's mother, a friendly-faced, gray-haired woman, coming into the room. "Sydney, the telephone, it's for you," Mrs. Riley said. Sydney sat up in a flash. "Is it my dad?" Sydney inquired eagerly. "No, I don't think so," Mrs. Riley said. Who could this be, Sydney wondered, climbing off the bed and heading out into the hallway. She reached for the phone on the small table in the hall and put it to her ear. "Hello?"
Hello, Sydney.
It was him, the killer. Sydney felt her entire body faltering, and she let out a cry. "No!" Tatum perked up and bolted out into the hallway, coming to Sydney's side. "Sydney, who is it?" Tatum asked.
Poor Billy boyfriend. That innocent guy doesn't stand a chance with you.
"Leave me alone!" Sydney cried into the phone, fighting tears. Mrs. Riley's eyes grew wide, and she began to knock on Dewey's bedroom door frantically.
Looks like you fingered the wrong guy again.
"Who are you?" Sydney asked, her voice cracking, tears beginning to fall.
Don't worry, you'll find out soon enough. I promise.
And with that, the line went dead. The phone fell from Sydney's hand onto the floor, and she let out a heaving sob as Tatum comforted her. Dewey came running headlong into the hallway, wearing only an undershirt and boxers, wielding his gun. He picked up the phone lying on the floor and put it to his ear. "Hello? Hello? Who the hell is this?" Dewey barked into the receiver. Mrs. Riley just stood to the side, her face a mix of fear and confusion. What did he mean, Sydney thought. What the fuck did he mean? You'll find out soon enough. Looks like you fingered the wrong guy again? She knew exactly what he meant deep down. The killer wasn't Cotton or Billy. She had put 2 innocent men in jail. The killer was still out there, and he wasn't going to stop until she was dead. He was going to finish what he started 1 year ago. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 6 of Scream, the fan novelization by Landon Turner. Before I get into my little breakdown and discussion on it, I want to let everybody know I'm going to be working hard on my Scream novel. Like I've said in the past, it's going to count only Scream 1, 2, 3, and 4 as canon. It takes place on the 20th around the 20th anniversary of the original kills in 1996. So it's going to be 2016. So part 5, 6, and 7 have nothing to do with this story. This is like an alternate version of events that happened after Scream 4. Here's the thing. I obviously don't have any recorded Ghostface voice lines that I can use like I can with the novelizations. So if there's anybody out there that thinks they can do a good Ghostface voice, please let me know in the comment section below. I'll get with you, have you send me a couple samples, and if you're interested and I think it fits, then I would love to have you do the Ghostface voice for the audiobook of my original Scream novel. With that being said, I love this chapter. It's a fun part of the book. Billy getting arrested. I still think that's a good kid. I really hope that he does turn out to be just as good as a kid as I think he is. Poor Billy. Sydney, obviously he's innocent, and Sydney's just, putting him through hell here. I mean, damn it, man. But I love the stuff with Dewey and Tatum. They're still brother and sister. Does Mom know? Come on, Deputy Dewey. The stuff at the police station is fun. Sydney, knocking Gail's bitch ass down a peg or two. I still think Gail should have been the one to get taken out in Scream 5, not the person who was. Don't want to spoil it in case somebody hasn't seen Part 5, but should have been her and not the other person. Love it when they get back home and, Ghostface calls, you got the wrong guy, and all that. Really cool scene in the movie. Enjoyed getting into Sydney's head throughout the chapter, especially at the police station. And just how she's struggling with, is Billy guilty? Is Cotton guilty? Is the killer still out there? I mean, that's stuff that you can't get in a movie. So I really appreciate these novelizations for letting us get into the heads of the characters. It's funny to go back and watch it where the sheriff is like, what are you doing with the cellular phone? 1996, not everybody had one. It was starting to get that way. Around 98, 99, it became more common and more as time went on. they were definitely more common than like 1992 when Zach Morris had the big, antenna phone at school. But it was still not like something that everybody had. That being said, great chapter. Really enjoying narrating this novelization. New chapter coming in the near future. Let me know what you thought of tonight's chapter and let Landon know in the comment section below. I love to hear from you guys. I love to discuss these books with you. And just want to hear how everybody's doing out there. It's kind of a crazy time right now. And just want everybody to hang in there. It's going to be fine. We're going to make it through. We got each other, and the horror community is a really awesome place. Yeah, that's all I can think of right now. If you haven't done so already, please click the like button, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, click the bell so you'll always know when new chapters are coming of these audiobooks. And if you want to go the extra mile, there's a ton of ways to do it. If you want to support the channel a little bit more, you can become a Patreon member, a channel member. There's an Amazon gift wish list link in the description below. You can also get a cameo video. We have a merch store. I got my books up for sale on Amazon. You can do a super thanks tip in the comments below. You can also tip through PayPal or Cash App. So many different ways to support the channel. I'm sure there's one that'll fit what you're thinking. If you need the information, it's always in the pinned comment and the description of these videos. Just check it out below. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, be excellent to each other, and remember, the sand is falling down the hourglass, so make the most of life while it lasts. I'll see you next time.
I love